If you look at people who are religious today, who are not in conflict with science, they have viewed their religious text as a spiritual, something that gives them spiritual support, not as a science textbook. The conflict in society is when you have those who are still religious, who want to use their religious text as their access point to understanding the natural world. And persistent efforts of the past to make that happen have just simply failed. The Bible does not work as a science textbook. In fact, Galileo knew this, and he himself was a religious man. He's famously quoted as saying, "The Bible tells you how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go."
But it's not all bad news, because it does mean that those who crash planes full of living people into buildings full of living people, shouting that God is great and believing it's going to get them to paradise, aren't going to get there.
About that,
one is only
about
sorry.
That we agree.
One is only sorry, and very sorry in my case, that there's no moment, at the moment of their extinction, there's no moment when they think, ah, damn, it isn't. But wishful thinking can't help that either. So my settled consideration, verdict on this is, they want to die, and I'm here to help them do so. And so should you be, and everyone in this room should be ashamed until they've done something to kill at least one jihadist or bring about the physical and moral and political and military defeat and humiliation of these people. And the God in which they believe, and the non-existent deity in which they dare to take permission to try and kill us all.
Christopher, have you ever prayed?
Once for a hard-on.
And as for the, as it were, would it matter if 1 in 1 million became a suicide bomber? Again, it's a cost-benefit analysis, isn't it? As long as you're not the one standing outside the wine bar in Ansbach when the suicide bomber goes off, it might be okay for you. It might be okay, and it seems to be for most people in our political parties in Britain, it might be okay for you to not worry about this identity question, not worry about the numbers, but you've just got to hope your kids don't like Ariana Grande and go on the wrong night. But I think the cost-benefit analysis of this has to be weighed up, and if you do think that, then say it. Say, we'll take a suicide bombing every now and then, we'll take the stabbings every now and then. Sure.
Fundamentalists have actually read the books, and they're right about them. These books are every bit as intolerant, every bit as divisive as the Osama bin Ladens of the world or the Jerry Falwells of the world suggest. And I'm not necessarily equating the two of them in moral terms. So once we dignify those claims, we are really hostage to their contents. I mean, the creator of the universe does hate homosexuals. If you read the Bible, at the very least, homosexual men, gay sex, is an abomination. It is spelled out in Leviticus. This edict is ramified in Romans. You can take Jesus and half his moods and get some really beautiful ethical precepts like the Golden Rule. But Jesus also said things like, in Luke 19, anyone who doesn't want me to reign over him, bring him before me and slay him before me. Okay? I guarantee you that the inquisitors of the Middle Ages, who were burning heretics alive for 5 solid centuries, they had read the whole New Testament. They had read the Sermon on the Mount. They found some way to square their behavior with the ministry of Jesus.
Sort of mysticism and Age of Aquarius type stuff. And one of the reasons why she felt that that was the right place to be was because she thought that scientists were arrogant. That they had all these answers to questions they didn't have any right to have answers to. But with her New Age friends, she would sometimes raise questions about their beliefs. And she noticed a pattern emerging, talking to her New Age friends versus talking to scientists, that scientists would sometimes say they didn't know the answer to something, and that her New Age friends would never say that. They had an answer for everything. And she realized, actually, science does claim to know the answer to some things. But there are other things that it very quickly admits it doesn't know the answer to. Dinesh just gave you a laundry list of things. Where did the universe come from? Why is there any universe? Is there life after death? And he says, and science has no clue about any of these things. As if that's a bad thing. Scientists are extremely proud of the fact that we know some things, and we know there are other things we don't know. We know where the dividing line is between what we know and what we don't know because of good reasons. For why there's a universe rather than not, we don't know the answer to that. Is there life after death? We know the answer to that. Why? Because we know what we're made of. We know how it acts. We know there is nothing to keep any sort of soul alive after the body dies. And that goes back to Ian's discussion of how does science know some things? Is science the only way of knowing things? Science is clearly not the only way of knowing things. There are other ways of truth. For example, mathematical truths are outside of science. They are logical truths, not empirical ones. But it would be a mistake to think that religion is a different way of obtaining truth that is outside everything else. If God existed, the one thing that if there were an omnipotent being that cared about us here on earth, I would expect clear instructions. I would expect a book that I knew exactly what it said, it was clear that it was right, and I would be able to follow it. If God did not exist, I would expect all sorts of different books. They would contradict each other. Some of them would be brilliant in parts, they would be silly in other parts, they would be uplifting in parts, they would be very depressing in other parts, they would be edited collections, they would be personal memoirs, and they would all disagree with each other. Which of these two theories fits the data? Thank you.
You believe all this because you feel it. Now, is this anything that you think is demonstrable to anybody else? In other words, you have a personal experience that justifies your belief, and that you believe it sincerely because of your personal experience. Do you think anybody else should believe until they have a personal experience?
Should they believe? Sure, they should believe because, like I said,
So you think?
Okay, when you think about the reasoning that we have, right or wrong, that's God there.
It is.
And that's in any of us.
What makes you think
that
that's God?
That we have to make a choice between right or wrong.
And what makes you think that that's God?
That's there. He puts that in you to make the choices between right or wrong. You don't put those decisions into your mind, your way of thinking.
No, I want to go back to what you answered, and that was you said that in fact, despite if somebody didn't have a personal experience to prove this, they should still believe. And your justification for this is that right and wrong exists.
You would pray that they would.
Can I get a damn sentence out? Your justification for this
is
what
Jesus said for us to do. Pray for them.
Okay, you know what? Until you demonstrate existence, I don't give a damn what Jesus says. There's absolutely the justification that you're using is something that could only possibly be personal. I've had some personal experience, and this justifies my belief. I'm fine with that. Your belief, as far as I can tell, it's justified. I think you're incorrect about what you're calling personal experience because you can't really identify it. Oh, it's just a feeling, or he speaks to me, or right and wrong, or the fact that the sun and everything else exists. No, there's an explanation for why the sun exists, and it's all naturalistic and scientific. There's no reason to hypothesize that there's any sort of supernatural creator or force behind it. What you're basically saying is this all feels good to you. You have plenty of things that you can't explain, and rather than investigating them and trying to find an explanation, you're happier just believing that it's all God and Jesus. Because it keeps you comfortable when things get bad. Okay, fine. I'm asking why that should be justified to anybody else. And your point was that everyone should believe this, even if they haven't had a personal experience, simply based on the existence of right and wrong. Well, guess what? Right and wrong don't exist. They're labels that we apply to phenomena. And the idea of what qualifies as right or what qualifies as wrong has changed over time. And you don't have to go any further than the book that you idolize to demonstrate this. There are plenty of things that used to be considered wrong or right, which now are either right or wrong.
Slavery is a fine
Slavery. Your Bible advocates slavery. And while it sounded to me, and I apologize if I'm getting this wrong, but there are certain dialects. I'm betting that you're African American, and I'm betting that your ancestors probably, based on the odds, and I could be wrong, were originally in the United States as slaves. Slavery is advocated by the Bible, and Christians used those passages in the Bible to support slavery. You believe that this God exists. He loves you. And yet you also believe that he advocated and supported slavery. It's in the book that you claim is true because it's true, or at least because you feel like it's true. That's not evidence that applies to anybody else. It's irrational.
Facing a problem at this moment. There is, I'm happy to say, a religion of peace in this world, but it's not Islam. Okay. To call Islam a religion of peace, as we hear ceaselessly reiterated, is completely delusional. Now, Jainism actually is a religion of peace. Jainism is the core principle of Jainism is nonviolence. Gandhi got his nonviolence from the Jains. The crazier you get as a Jain, the less we have to worry about you. It is. Jain extremists are actually they are paralyzed by their pacifism. Jain extremists they can't take their eyes off the ground when they walk lest they step on an ant. They filter every sip of water through cheesecloth lest they swallow and thereby kill a bug. So the problem, notice, the problem is not religious extremism, okay, because extremism is not a problem if your core beliefs are truly nonviolent. The problem isn't fundamentalism, which we often hear this said. These are euphemisms. I mean, the only problem with Islamic fundamentalism are the fundamentals of Islam.
I'm delighted, first of all, to hear that the lady thinks that my book shouldn't be censored. I'm sorry to hear she hasn't read it. I hope she will read it. And when she does read it, I think she will conclude that it is not offensive. Obviously, you can't accuse a book of being offensive unless you've read it. I believe strongly that you would not find it offensive.
But it is very likely that there are many people who would, whether they've read it or not.
If you are offended by reading views that disagree with yours, then yes, you will be offended. However, it's not gratuitously offensive. It simply puts an argument, and if your views are strong enough, as I believe they are, you will be able to defend your views. You will not say, oh, it's offensive, it's offensive. You will say, no, you're wrong here, and you're wrong here, and you're wrong here. And that's what you should do. And I think that is what you would do, and I hope you will do it when you've read the book. The first thing I'd say is, why do you teach your children about Jesus being the Son of God? Why don't you teach your children about Muhammad and his winged horse? The answer is that you were brought up as Christian and not Muslim. Why don't you teach your children about Lord Shiva? The answer is you were not brought up Hindu. So it is arbitrary which religion you were brought up in. Now, there's a myth going about that I have said that all religious teaching is child abuse, and I have not said that. What I have said is that labeling children with the religion of their parents, saying to a child, you are a Christian child, is a form of child abuse. What I would prefer you to say is, there are lots of religions in the world. The Christians believe this, the Muslims believe that, the Hindus believe the other, and when you're old enough, you can take your pick as to which, if any, religion you want to follow. There is one other thing that I think is child abuse, and that is frightening children out of their wits by teaching them about hellfire. And I trust and believe that you don't do that. There's a tremendous difference between saying that we don't have all the answers and saying that therefore religion does. Of course science doesn't have all the answers, science is working on it, but to the extent that science doesn't have all the answers, and of course it doesn't, what on earth makes anyone think that religion does? I agree. I mean, I'm not one of those who wants to stop Christian traditions. This is historically a Christian country. I'm a cultural Christian, the same way as many of my friends call themselves cultural Jews or cultural Muslims. So yes, I love singing carols along with everybody else. I'm not one of those who wants to purge our society of our Christian history. If there is any threat to those sorts of things, I think you'll find it comes from rival religions and not from atheists.
Okay, let's go.
Well, I think it's not difficult to see why people would make up something as an explanatory device. We come into the world, it's obviously a very beautiful place, a very mysterious place, and we're faced with the question of where does it all come from? And it's natural for humans who are used to seeing humans make things. We're used to seeing houses that are built by people. We're used to seeing cars that are made by people, hand axes that are made by people. It's natural to think that the world was made by somebody as well. And until Darwin came along, that was getting on for being a reasonable hypothesis. It was never very reasonable, but it was only when Darwin came along and completely blew it out of the water that it became completely satisfying to be an atheist. We now do have an explanation for where things come from. There are other reasons why it's psychologically satisfying to people to believe in God. People feel insecure, they want the reassurance of feeling a kind of father figure looking after them. So there are plenty of psychological reasons why humans might have invented God.
Well, it means that I don't have the presumption to say there's absolutely no God. I can't prove it.
Right.
But what I can say is I certainly wouldn't want to live in a universe with one. The universe is far more exciting to me and more enlightening and more invigorating without a God. It's the idea that people can somehow find spiritual solace in the idea that they are being controlled by some cosmic puppet maker versus the idea that we have this brief moment in the sun and the meaning in our lives is one we create. And we have this great ability to think about the universe. Let's make the most of our brief moment in the sun. It's a central question of science, to try and understand why the universe is the way it is and make predictions about it. And to me, the fact that we've come so close to understanding the entire universe and its origins is just remarkable. I can't imagine why people wouldn't want to celebrate that and why they'd want to be afraid of that knowledge. Some people would rather that their children not know how the universe works.
A
for
lot
fear
of people,
that
actually.
Yeah, exactly. For fear that it will affect their faith, then no. And what a disservice to children. And in fact, in that sense, I would have to say, agree with Richard Dawkins, that in that sense, much of religion is child abuse.
Do you get?
I think that using the word God or the attitude of faith toward that which you don't know is a cop-out. It's a way of slapping a label onto something rather than trying to understand it. Or, since we may not understand everything, just say there's some things we don't understand. To invent stories that sound as if they were true or could be true, to pretend that they're true just so that we can have a story, I think is unsatisfying, and it could even be immoral because it could lead you to mistaken policies, to getting in the way of your best understanding of how the world works, to doing things that lead to more harm than good. I mean, the concrete example would be treating cancer with some cockamamie herbal or homeopathic formula instead of the best medicine that we have, or justifying invasions and murders and sacrifices on the grounds of appeasing some god or carrying out some divine mandate. I think there's nothing but mischief that can come from inventing stories for that which we don't understand. There's nothing wrong with saying there's some things we don't understand.